things like this do happen in the industry, and we'll have to kind of see how this plays out for them. I think this is something that we're going to have to keep an eye on.
And Michael, look at you in 1 second. I just wanted to give people a recap. We had just started the recording in the video portion. Skewed and Reviewed back from CES, and we are currently discussing the news about Bungie being away from Activision now in the shakeup there. Michael, your take on this situation?
Yeah, I mean, we all know that Bungie tends to bring a lot of interesting IP when they join a company. Obviously, when they joined Microsoft, it was Halo. They went to Activision to do the Destiny series. And I think they were pretty unhappy. I think there were a lot of things between Activision and Bungie that were not really public knowledge that we didn't know about until after all of this kind of went down. It seemed like Bungie was kind of unhappy with how Activision was running the Destiny franchise. They were a little bit unhappy with how they were promoting it and that sort of thing, and they feel they could do better without them. Bungie's been around for a long time, and I'm sure they'll be fine. There were even allegations, and there were even some reports that they were popping off champagne when they found out they were separating. So clearly some bad blood there. Activision, I think, will be fine. They'll rebound from this like they always have. But it's pretty unfortunate to have all of this going on at once. We see the price, the stock prices are down. I think as of Friday when they closed, they're down like almost 10%. So pretty significant. But I think overall they'll recover. But it's just unfortunate to see it go down like this.
Yeah, and we had, like you said, we had heard all sorts of speculation. The speculation was Activision was not happy with the DLC for Destiny 2 not selling. We heard reports that maybe Destiny 2 had not received the response that they had hoped for. There was some possibility that people weren't thrilled about it being only available on Battle.net versus Steam and other outlets. So, like you said, it was interesting because I remember when they pitched this project, we were told this was a 10-year arrangement and there was over $100 million committed to this project. And right now, here they go. We heard, what was it, about a month ago that there was another game reportedly in the works. But you kind of expected that, but at the same time, to see this happen so quickly, and the fact that Bungie came out and said they're self-publishing versus going with another publisher, my guess is there's probably some kind of non-compete in there that they can't just, jump over to a different publisher and put the thing out. That being said, what surprised me about it was Call of Duty is reportedly not selling as well as it used to. It's still an extremely profitable franchise. But in light of the situation, a lot of people are saying Activision needs a franchise. I mean, they had a huge success by doing the remastering of Crash Bandicoot. We've got the Crash racing game coming. Spyro the Dragon has been popular, but they don't have Skylanders going anymore. You don't have Destiny anymore. We already know about the other side and the fallout with Blizzard and everything that's going on there. And, we can never get the full name properly in my head, but Seiko Shadows Die Twice is coming. What are they going to have to do other than, make better games? That goes, or I shouldn't say better, but ones that are more accepted by the gaming community. But how important do you think it is that they come up with a couple of franchises versus just improving the quality of what they had? Justin, why don't you take that one, please?
So it's a difficult balancing act because, you look at I'll use EA as an example. So the life cycle of EA through the early 2000s, EA got a lot of flack for they gobbled up a lot of smaller studios. Like they took on Westwood Studios, they took on BioWare, they took on a bunch
Maxis.
of studios. Maxis, correct. So they had a bad reputation for taking these studios and then sort of like running them into the ground. That was what was alleged. I'm not saying I 100% agree with that, but in the mid 2000s, EA was sort of struggling with its reputation. Things were getting a little bit stagnant. And if anyone remembers, 2007 was a very, very good year for EA because they started the Mass Effect franchise. They started the Dead Space franchise. They put out Mirror's Edge. These were a lot of like very risky gambles that, they were not based on prior things. I mean, they had been inspired by prior existing games. So like Dead Space was very much inspired by Resident Evil 4, for instance, but all those titles that they were kind of banking on in the mid 2000s was very risky, and it ended up paying off for them. They were able to create some very long lasting franchises, some of which they're still relying on to this day. But, these large companies kind of go through this cycle where things sort of become stale, and they have to, bank on some risky ventures to try to create some new franchises. That being said, what they do have existing, it is very important for them to nail this, especially now, because if they don't have Destiny was a very, very big risk. Destiny would be an example of one of those Mass Effect type risks for Activision. Now that they don't have that, they really do need to rely on what's coming out of Blizzard. They need to rely on what's coming out of Call of Duty, and they're going to have to put some capital into new franchises and new risks. It's going to be a very tough couple years for Activision, I think, just because Call of Duty does sell very well and Blizzard titles do sell very well, but Activision is a very large company that has a very large overhead. They're going to have some safe bets and some new risks.
All right. And Michael, your take on this, please.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of echo what Justin was talking about also, I think they were under the impression, I'm not saying Destiny 2 didn't sell well. I think they sold very well. And I personally thought the second one was even better than the first.
I agreed.
But I think they were under the impression by bringing Bungie on board, they would get a Halo smash hit, right? Something that would not only be profitable, but would span multitudes of expansions, multitudes of additional sequels. And I don't feel that, whether true or not, I don't feel Activision believed that it was the mega hit that they were expecting it to be. And it sounds like, based on what we hear coming out of Bungie, is that there was a strain there, that Bungie maybe was restricted on what they could do, and they didn't feel that Activision was allowing them to make the Destiny franchise as successful as it could be. So what that does is it leaves us with Call of Duty, and we can say Call of Duty is not selling as well. I honestly think Call of Duty, Battlefield series, I think a lot of those are starting to get to a point where we got with a lot of the EA titles. NBA Live, Madden, which has always been successful, the college series, we know how those kind of things. But EA always had that annual sports release that even became kind of stale for a while and stopped drawing the attention that the previous games had drawn. I think we're getting that way with the Call of Duty and Battlefield. I mean, we've kind of talked about with Call of Duty, there's only so much you can do when you're adding maps and gameplay features. Yes, the game is still fun. Is it more fun than last year's game or the year before? Is there really that need to upgrade every year for those types of titles? I don't know. Again, I think they get a little stale after a while anyways. Again, not to say that they're not so profitable. They are. But that's true with even sports titles. So, yeah, I mean, Activision, again, I think they're going to be fine. But they do need to come up with something that's a risk but is going to be successful for them. And the fact that they're getting this reputation that they're kind of driving some of these creative IP creators into the ground and not giving them the ability to really flourish, whether that's true or not, that's going to be a hit, I think, to them, and they're going to have to work on their identity a bit. They don't want to get into that hatred mode where everybody hates Activision the way that a lot of folks hate EA. Again, right or wrong, it does impact sales and impacts the ability for them to release interesting projects that are actually successful. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I mean, like I said, we kept hearing it's all about the DLC, and they're not happy with the DLC. And everybody has always complained about DLC this, DLC this. And we have seen the publishers more and more saying, this is where the money is, the DLC, the add-on content, the custom skins, the stuff like that, microtransactions. Whereas the people who make the games, I think, just want to make the best game. And you remember, they talked really big about, we don't, a lot of them are coming out and saying, we don't want to nickel and dime you with DLC. We want to give you the content for free. We want to have free updates. And then the game sells or doesn't sell to the point that they expect. And then you get the publishers going, geez, we kind of promised free DLC, but we need to monetize this more. What more can we do? And I think that you see a lot of friction coming in there where the developers are saying, we want to focus on DLC and continuing the franchise, where you have others coming in saying, hey, what about a new outfit? What about a new this? What about, we got money. Let's keep it going. And I think it gets to a point, like you said, where there becomes a situation where I saw this at Sierra, I saw this at Monolith, where you had people who were making the games who were concentrating on making the best possible product they could. But then the business side of it came in and it was like, look, we're behind schedule, we're behind budget, get it out the door. And people were like, it's not done. We'll get it out the door, we'll worry about it later. And there you go. I think it's going to be interesting to close on this, where E3 is going to come into all this. Are they going to come out and business as usual and say, here's the new Call of Duty game, here's what else we have? Or are they going to pull back a bit and say, okay, let's take a step back and reassess things? Or are they going to come out very big, very aggressive and say, hey, this is the direction we're moving in? It's going to make things interesting. So, speaking of interesting, there were some allegations made in the subject of Gearbox, and specifically against their head guy, Randy Pitchford. Now, a former friend, as he addressed him, Randy has addressed this individual as a former friend who was one of their legal counsel, if I believe. They're involved in some cross litigation. I understand that Gearbox has had some issues with him. He's had some issues with Gearbox, and he apparently has alleged, and I have to be very clear, this is all alleged, nothing proven, just reported, that apparently at a time when Gearbox was not paying bonuses to their employees, this individual is alleged that Pitchford apparently took a $12 million personal bonus for himself out of the company cash, and then further alleged that he had a hard drive full of underage pornography. And, it's shocked and divided the gaming community, because Pitchford himself has basically said, yeah, I've got a drive with pornography, at least reportedly, but there's nothing inappropriate or underage about it. And this is just somebody who's, back and forth. So, Michael, why don't you start us off with this? What was your reaction when this all came down? And do you think long term, is this going to hurt? Some people think this could basically signal, regardless of how it goes, no chance of seeing Borderlands 3 down the road.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those nasty things that can really divide a company and destroy a company. I mean, realistically, I know there were also allegations made against, I think, Calendar. There was another suit that was about some home loans that were. There was a home loan supposedly that was used out of the Gearbox money that was used to kind of pay for some of that stuff. And there's a lot of allegations going on. And unfortunately, in this day and age of public persecution at social media, the web, everything else, we're not going to really know, or we may not even get a chance to know who's right or wrong in this case before the public sways the decision whether or not they're going to continue to support Gearbox, right? So not only is this going to be impactful for the company itself, for the people who work there, but it's going to divide the community. And assuming we get a Borderlands 3, based on this information we may or may not, what's the public's take going to be on Borderlands 3? Because of this stuff going on, is it going to impact the saleability of a Borderlands 3 or anything from Gearbox at this point? Again, public opinion tends to really be the status quo these days, for right or wrong, and we get to a point where that does have an impact on how well a company survives and how well a product is seen. So I think if Gearbox survives this from a financial perspective, and if we get to a point where there's a Borderlands 3, I think the public opinion may be a deciding factor in how well it does, honestly.
And, Justin, before we get your take on this, one of the things I read, they said before any of this stuff came out, there was what some people refer to as an erosion of consumer confidence. And what they said is, let's take a look at where we are. We had Borderlands 2 and they were riding high. We're not really going to go into Borderlands, the pre-sequel, as much, but what they focused on is the issue with Aliens Colonial Marines, where the allegations came out that perhaps money that was paid to them to develop the game were shoved over to Borderlands production. You had the whole issue of Duke Nukem Forever coming out and not being what people had expected it to be. Then you had the situation with, I had no issue with Borderlands, the pre-sequel. I thought it was quite enjoyable, although it was more DLC than a, full game, but, that's another point. Then you had the whole situation with Battleborn, which, again, was a game that I thoroughly enjoyed, did not catch on with consumers. And then, of course, what have we had from them recently? Well, we had the remastering of the classic Bulletstorm, which was a great game. But, many people, myself included, would much rather see a Bulletstorm 2. Still think it was one of the best games made that never got a full-on, never really took off. It's one of those cult classics that deserved to do better than it did. And there you go. And so, Justin, where are we with all this? I mean, what does the future hold?
Yeah, that was the avenue I was going to talk about. And you've done a really good job kind of chronicling, the troubles that Gearbox has been in for quite some time, really, since Alien Colonial Marines was really kind of the beginning of their troubles. But that was back in 2013, so it's been a number of years. But I agree with you that Borderlands, the pre-sequel, was an enjoyable enough game, but it really kind of just felt like an expansion. It was not better than Borderlands 2. I wouldn't say it was like much worse. It was all right for what it was, but it definitely was not a Borderlands 3. And they had a number of remasters after that. They took on publishing for Deserts of Carrick for Homeworld, which I think was more of like an indie kind of level game. They remastered the Homeworld collection. And then, then they released Battleborn, which, as we know, I also had some fun with it. Really wasn't my kind of game, but it did not do well. That is without a doubt. It was not a very successful title.
And they promoted it heavily at E3 and PAX, and which was so funny, too. Sorry to interrupt, but I think it's important to note. Not only were these things promoted heavily, they had big crowds lined up to get in and play it at these conventions. So it wasn't like it was being ignored. I mean, I remember, big lines at both PAX and E3 to get in and get, hands-on time with the game. And people were finishing the game and then going right back in line to play it again. So do continue.
Well, yeah. One point to that, sorry to interrupt as well, but with Battleborn, I think some of that was timing, though, as well, with Overwatch being released so soon. Because I agree, Battleborn I enjoyed a lot, but then Overwatch kind of took over, and it's hard to compete against Blizzard when it comes to something that's a very similar take on the same genre. So
yeah, that is true. Go on, Justin.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think one of the major issues with Battleborn is just saturation, and you saw that with the MMO genre when MMOs were absolutely huge, and World of Warcraft was the game to beat. And there were so many MMOs trying to be the next World of Warcraft, but the issue is that when you have such a titan in one specific genre, and so Battleborn and Overwatch competing in a very similar genre, which is like a Dota kind of like a MOBA style shooter. it's too hard to get in there, like when there's already one titan in that genre. And you also have the fact that there were a dozen other companies also trying to release their own arena shooter that was very similar in style. You just had market saturation, and it's tough. And to kind of go back to my point about Gearbox, they've had a very troubling number of years, and I hope that Borderlands 3 is deep in development, because if so, then we'll probably see it released. But if not, then they're really in big trouble. And I won't comment on exactly the personal allegations against Randy Pitchford. I think that's something that people really shouldn't speculate on. That's a legal kind of battle, and that should be settled in court and not settled in the court of social media, so to speak. But I the only speculation I do have about it is that when you do have kind of this mudslinging going on behind the scenes, it could be indicative of another sign of issues going on within the company, that after a number of years of some very troubling financial releases, that maybe this is just part of that unraveling. I hope not. I really do hope the best for Gearbox. I've been a fan of their products, fan of them as a company, but it's unquestionable that they've been going through some very, very difficult times, and it could be even worse behind the scenes.
Yeah, and it's true, because I also read this thing the other day, and I found it interesting, and I thought about it and said, these people are absolutely right. They mentioned the fact that the company, now they did put out Borderlands 2 VR, which has been quite good for the PS VR system, but it is just Borderlands 2 from a single player experience, albeit in VR. Somebody said it was rather interesting, and they brought up the whole subject of Borderlands 3, in that the company doesn't, it's kind of like the whole Voldemort thing in Harry Potter. They aren't willing to say its name. They'll say stuff like, we are making the game that you want us to make, or they released that concept artwork. We had the one thing about a year ago where a publicist said, I'm working on the next Borderlands game. But nobody comes out and says Borderlands 3. Or we're working on the next Borderlands sequel or something like that. And someone said, it's very odd that, I think this week ahead will be very interesting in the fact of, there are two ways to address this. They could either just say, no comment, we're going to let this thing play out, and there you go. Or there could be the other side where you go on the offensive. And they could go on the offensive, and one of the best ways to get people to not be talking about stuff that you don't want them talking about would be to, I think, make an announcement, release an artwork, release some trailers. So I'm curious, it's like you said, if there is something on Borderlands to show, this might be the time to do it. I mean, sure, people might scream, oh, this is nothing but deflection, but at the same time, you're going to get people talking about the games, which is what I think we should be talking about, rather than, allegations and the darker side of the business. So now, speaking of darker side, Space: The Final Frontier, we've got the second season of Star Trek Discovery coming up, and producer Alex Kurtzman has taken a little bit of heat, more than a little bit, because on the news that Star Trek 4 has basically been shelved and not going to happen anytime soon, at least, we have the reports that a fourth animated series, second animated series on CBS All Access is in the works. This one is more for a children's point of view. And of course, then we had the issue with Kurtzman addressing canon, essentially saying, well, we've always said that Star Trek Discovery is 10 years before. It's going to get in the way. It's going to link up with canon. We had him at Comic-Con say flat out, we are definitely going to explain why some of these things, like why does the technology look too advanced if it's just before Kirk's time, where's this? Whereas it seems like in some recent statements, he's basically kind of trying to defend it by saying, well, we have writers in the room that are always bringing stuff up, but at the same time, there's the whole need to tell a story standpoint almost as if the implication was, yeah, we're canon, we're 10 years before. However, we've got our own stories to tell, and essentially we're going to just try to shoehorn it canon in whenever it's appropriate, and then when it's not, we'll go from there. So, Michael, why don't you take your shot at this one? What's your take on that?
Oh, that's a lot. Let me start with Star Trek 4 and the cancellation rumors. We discussed, a couple of months ago, I think, how the pay cut that they were trying to get Chris Pine and Chris Hemsworth to take, and we said, could it survive without Chris Hemsworth? Probably. But could it survive without Chris Pine? No. I mean, you can't have Kirk or recast Kirk and have it still be a Star Trek movie, I think. And I know there's been a lot of debate over how many scripts they've had. It just seems like from the get-go that Star Trek 4 has been kind of a mess. Even though when we were at CinemaCon and, the Paramount folks were there and they talked about how they had all these Star Trek films in the works and they were going to be releasing more Star Trek films. Sounds like now we're kind of seeing that maybe we've seen the end of that particular timeline. I know there's some discussion about the Quentin Tarantino one as well. We don't know if that's still in the works or not, or if that one's been shelved. I think there's still some speculation over that one as well. But there wasn't really a lot based on if that was going to be a Star Trek 4 type sequel, or was that going to be in a completely different universe or a different timeline. So there's that piece. As far as the Discovery, I think that's part of the problem with when you're dealing with Star Trek fans and Star Wars fans, right? They're a bunch of dedicated folks who will nickel and dime and piecemeal their way through every bit of canon to ensure that things are being followed exactly as they expect them to be. I've been to a couple, they did a big Saturday Night Live skit about Star Trek conventions and how they'll bring up, episode 15, why did this happen? And I think that's true with any serious fan base, is they're going to really dig in and start questioning anything that doesn't fit their expectation of a timeline. So anytime they've done other Star Trek shows, I know they've tried to veer away from some of this direct canon timeline and kind of make it, a little bit more out there. Having Discovery take place 10 years before the original, and then at a time when now we could do a lot more visually than we could back in the 60s, 70s, 80s even. It's going to look more advanced. I mean, how could it not? And there are a lot of features and functions that weren't even considered back in the time of the original Star Trek that now they're thinking about. And you're right, you got to tell a story. And I think having it take place prior to that time in the Star Trek universe was probably a bad choice, honestly. At least that's how I feel about as far as Discovery goes.
Yeah, I think you're so right. Now, Justin, I know you were not I know you're not a big fan, not a fan, I shouldn't say, but it's not really something you watch on a regular basis. So I'm going to switch over for your next segment to something that you definitely are a fan of. Tell us what's new in the world of alien gaming, please.
Yeah, so last week we spoke a little bit about the speculation about an announcement for an Alien game. I think at the time, that's what it was. We were speculating about the teasing that they were doing on Facebook with these like motion pictures and teasing something with read, play, and watch, and and all that. And actually, like about a day later, it was either a day or 2 days later, they did announce a new Alien game called Alien Blackout. So this is the game that we were speaking about as far back as I think before the VGAs. Like, we thought that maybe it was going to be shown at the VGAs, because I think shortly before that's when Fox had trademarked the title related to gaming. And a lot of the speculation around the industry was that this was going to be the shooter. This was going to be the Cold Iron Studio shooter that had been announced a little over a year ago. I had speculated last week that this was not going to be the shooter. I think it was going to be something else. And I was correct. It was something else. I was not expecting a mobile game. And that's what it is. So this is an iOS and Android title. Looks to be somewhat similar to Five Nights at Freddy's, where I guess the concept behind this game is that they saw the scene in Alien Covenant towards the end where they were trying to corral the alien into the shuttle. Spoilers, for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's like well over a year old now. So they were trying to use the cameras to corral the alien through hallways to try to veer it into the shuttle area. And so that's sort of the concept of the game. I guess it's somewhat puzzle based where you're trying to protect people while corralling the alien through corridors. Somewhat similar to Five Nights at Freddy's. That's a similar kind of puzzle game where it's also horror based. There was quite a bit of backlash about this, and it does from a larger standpoint in the gaming industry. I have a positive and negative comment about this. So I do wonder, like, post Diablo Immortal, how exactly does a company announce a mobile title? Because there was such a large backlash even about this one, because a lot of people, and rightly so, saw this is the legacy of Alien Isolation. They were very quick to say this is not a sequel to Alien Isolation. They're very adamant on saying that this is not Alien Isolation 2. But for a lot of people, that's not a horribly convincing argument, because it does feature Amanda Ripley. It does feature a very, very similar art style. But it does play completely differently. It is not like does not play like Alien Isolation. So that argument's a bit of a wash. That being said, though, I do have to say, from a personal standpoint, I'm not a mobile gamer. I'm not very interested in playing mobile games. Like I've said when we've talked about this topic in the past, I think there is a place for certain mobile games like Fallout Shelter, more puzzle-based mobile games, Hearthstone, maybe games that link to other games in a way that can utilize like a touch screen in a way that's interesting and fun. I do not have much, or if any, interest in playing like full-fledged like AAA titles on a mobile device, especially a horror game. I can't really think of anything that's like less appealing to me than playing a survival horror game on a mobile device. I think about a lot of the times I'm sitting, on my phone is like on a bus or, waiting somewhere. I don't want to be playing a horror game just in public. Like that's doesn't really seem very appealing to me. But, we do have to have a conversation about, is this really where the gaming industry is going? It does seem more and more common that that companies are putting more and more resources into mobile devices and mobile gaming in general. That being said, by accounts, I've heard that this game is actually pretty fun. AVP Galaxies is a website that I follow, and their impressions of it were pretty good. They thought it played pretty fun, and all the power to them. If they're able to create a successful title, maybe this will allow Fox to invest more resources into other titles. The shooter is still coming. It is a massively multiplayer online shooter. That's all we know about it. And they also said that they have multiple Alien titles in the works. So this isn't the end of the world, despite the backlash. So we'll have to kind of see how this plays out. And as far as like the greater implications on gaming in general, how we're going to go forward.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right on that. So, it's just such an interesting topic. Now, another topic I wanted to get to before we wrap up with our consumer electronics show coverage, and we don't need to go into this too deep, even though it's a very deep topic. There was a lot of speculation that Disney's finalization of the acquisition of Fox was going to happen in, possibly on New Year's Day. Now we're hearing it might happen in February or March. I mean, it's pretty much done. It's past its regulatory stuff. Justin, you were talking about Alien. We, had some news that Covenant sequel, no news. Waterston, who said she hasn't heard anything, but she's open to doing it. But little something I wanted to throw out there for discussion possibly at next week's segment is that we've heard news that, and this is again kind of coming out of a little bit of Ace Comic Con because they had a Dark Phoenix panel, that with reshoots, Dark Phoenix is now over $200 million in budgets. Now remember, this has had, 2 or 3 delays for release, and it's had multiple reshoots. It's currently over $200 million in cost. Now we're hearing word that Fox has scrapped all the Marvel films it had in development. Now, to give you an idea, folks, we're talking Gambit, which is they've been saying for years, Gambit with Channing Tatum was coming, Doctor Doom, Silver Surfer, and apparently are all dead. Gambit, they've been trying rapidly to get into production this year, and now there's a big question over the X-Force and what's going to happen with Deadpool's next film. So very, very interesting to see what is happening, because we're already starting to see that thing that we talked about as to what was going to happen as the date that Disney formally takes these things over. Are things going to be put into production beforehand, or are they going to be left? And, does Disney at this point get to say what goes into production, what doesn't? Very, very interesting. But let's talk technology, Michael. We had the Consumer Electronics Show this last few days in Las Vegas. Met with a lot of companies. I mean, we have photos up right now from Razer and Samsung with some of the great technology. We saw Google with their home assistants. My wife did a wonderful demo of a cooking demonstration. Gourmet, who do the air fryers, the air rotisseries, they were fantastic. Polaroid with some of the mobile printing. Vivitar, a lot of great cameras, security cameras. And then we had some interesting things, Panasonic, RCA. Now, Michael, I assume you're going to be talking about EVGA and, of course, Zotac. But did you get a chance to experience Creative's demonstration?
I did not get to go to Creative, unfortunately.
Okay. Now, I did. Reason I wasn't sure, folks, is that Michael and Mark were there ahead of our arrival, and they did a lot of meetings, and this is a massive event. It's all over the Las Vegas Convention Center. It's all over the Sands Venetian Convention Center, meeting rooms, and then, of course, there are private meetings through suites all throughout Vegas. Now, Justin, you're interesting guy tech-wise, and so I think you'd find this very interesting. Creative has got this new audio, and it is a mixture of hardware and application. And what it is that it is I guess for lack of a better words, I would call it a dongle. Now, it measures out your face, and they measure like your face and your ears because, as it was explained to us in our meeting, it's called Super X-Fi technology. And the way it was described to us is that everybody's face is different, and as such, the construction of your face, the size of your ears, so on and so forth, influences how you hear and process sound. And so what they do is they have this device, it's like a dongle, and you pair it up with your headphones. Now, you can either they essentially use an app, they get this information like your face structure, they use that to load it into this dongle, and with that, of course, they can also set profiles for various headphones, some of theirs as well as other ones, and they said they're looking to add all sorts of others. Right now they said it was, and it works with Android as well, but of course they kind of had to use some workarounds with various adapters to make it work on the Apple. Now, what it does, and this is the part that it just blew our mind. We were in a theater, and they showed us this various clips. There was like something from Avatar, something from various films, some mono sound things, some stereo music videos, and they played them on speakers all through around the room. And then they said, okay, now go ahead and put these headphones on. Now, imagine having a set of headphones on, but the sound does not sound like it is coming from within the headphones. It sounds like it's coming from the speakers around the room. And they said, okay, you think we're playing a game with you that you put the headphones on and we're playing the audio through the speakers, making you think. And he goes, go ahead and test us with that. Lift the ear cups off and on. And it was very amazing because while you wear the headphones, it truly feels like the sound is coming from all around you, not emanating from the cups and the headphones. And they, said this is it, and this is what they're going to be doing. That was really, really impressive to me, and I'm really curious to see. And I had like so many questions, like, you're adding more headphones, but are we going to have a situation where how long until various movies and various games adapt this technology? And from what I understand, they will take any of the existing stuff that's on the market and work. And so I'm just, my big thing right now is I like using the headphones I have. I don't want to have to get a bunch of adapters or change over to the setup that you have, but I'm very intrigued for this and what its potential is. So that was a huge thing for me. Another thing that I was really blown away by, we talked about the stuff that Samsung had. They have these space-saving monitors. They have, it had them in standard high def and 4K. They had a giant curve monitor. We have a video up on the site. But I wanted to swing back to Razer. We had a really, really nice one-on-one meeting with them. They took us actually into the back area. They showed us this wonderful concept device they were working on, which was a chair that you sit in, and it had. I got to play what we're playing. It was Overwatch and Doom, and it had kind of like a rumble effect between the headphone. It had the chroma lighting and the keyboard, but anytime you did certain things, the chair, which had abilities to keep you aligned properly, would have like a rumble and a force feedback effect to it. But the real star of our thing was the turret system, which was a mechanical keyboard and wireless mouse that operates under a magnetic tray. So essentially you put it on your lap, and through one dongle you can use it both on the Xbox One and the PC. So for example, if you want to play a shooter on your Xbox One, you now have the option to use a mouse and a keyboard without a cumbersome setup, and simply by removing the dongle, you could just plug it into your PC and go from there. So that was a really impressive thing for me. And of course, we have so much more stuff, and I'll be covering that later. We saw drones, we saw gaming chairs, a lot of VR, a lot of just really impressive stuff everywhere we look, cameras. I want to hear what Michael was impressed about. So, Michael, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's only so much we could talk about here, but we'll be doing a lot more write-ups later on. One of the big announcements for CES was the 2060 graphics card from NVIDIA, and that was shown in force both at Zotac and at EVGA. Both had their own versions of what their own, their cards were. It's kind of more for the lower end video game market that still want ray tracing, but the performance is pretty much, I think it's on par between like a 1070 type graphic card. So we got to see that. A couple of things that I thought were really cool started with EVGA. They also had an audio card, which is good to see some competition finally in that market, because it's been a long time since the audio cards have been kind of on the forefront of emerging technology. For a lot of time, even recently, in fact, the way onboard sound has become so mainstream that a lot of people have kind of gone away from audio cards in general. So I kind of talked to them about this, and their audio card, ironically called the new audio card, NU. They partnered with Audio Note, which is a premier audio company that's based out of the UK. And they actually have built so much into this card. It's got its own, it works as both a DAC and as a headphone amplifier. It supports, it has a 6.3 millimeter headphone jack on it. The folks at Audio Note actually went so far as they individually pick their own transistors, their own solder, their own wires. They build them to such extreme specifications to get the absolute best quality sound out of it. And I know it sounds, everybody's like, how good can the sound card really sound? And it's amazing when you put on a set of high quality headphones, how crisp and how clear and how amazing it can sound. Currently, they're looking at a retail price of about $249 ish. It's in a PCIe expansion card, but it's beautiful. They pack a ton of stuff on this card. It works both with USB, and it also works as analog headphone jack. So it does not only MP3 playouts, but it can also dynamically switch to a non-computer version of an audio file once it's an uncompressed audio file. And you can put those in the same playlist, and it will dynamically switch between the two. So it allows you to play both your standard compressed music, and for those who are looking for a more amazing experience, it can play uncompressed music as well. In addition to gaming, in addition to having ports that you can attach to your home theater system, I mean, overall, it's just a fantastic quality product. Moving on to Zotac, again, in addition to the 2060s, which they've announced, they had a 2080 Ti Arctic Storm that has a built-in water cooler, has a built-in water block on it. So it's simply a plug and play, plug it into your existing water block or to an AIO cooler, and you can go from there. They also showed off their new VR backpack. Zotac's pretty interesting in this, that they actually have a computer that's backpack size. The second version's quite a bit lighter and quite a bit smaller than the original. I think it's still in the 20-ish pound range, but it allows you to strap it on, put on an HTC Vive with the wireless controller on it, and you can pretty much wander your room in VR if you want with no cables attached. So again, a lot of interesting stuff. Those are just two of the many companies I went and saw. AlphaCool released a lot of really cool stuff, which I'll talk about later. iBuyPower has some amazing equipment coming out, and that type of thing. So in general, a really great show. Way too much that we could talk about here, but overall, I was really excited about it. Had a very good gaming focus, which CES has kind of been missing a little bit over the past couple of years. So I think we're really driving into some innovation, some creativity, and some new products where things are starting to get a little stale. So excited for that.
Yeah, and the nice thing too is Michael also mentioned the companies EVGA and Zotac. They also have the 2070 card series out there. There is a lot of stuff that we've just lightly, haven't even gotten into because there was so much. I mean, we had stuff from Sony. There's stuff from Samsung. We were experiencing just hundreds upon hundreds of companies. There was the showcases that kicked off the events. We saw storage things from Western Digital, Kingston, Patriot, things like that. You had those little looked like a raccoon, Michael. That was kind of interesting. They had the retro, the one-up guys had the retro arcade setups, and I decided to take my wife on Mortal Kombat 2, and I'm not the best Mortal Kombat player in the world, and she whooped me senseless because she had a very simple approach that is basically, I'm just going to start throwing punches like crazy and you walk into it. We saw Fallout 76 themed smart watches. We saw, K-pop stuff. There was Seagate, who was fantastic and very accommodating. And then just, on and on and on down the line. It was, to give you folks an idea, we have something like 557 photos just on the Facebook album. Michael hasn't even mentioned the stuff we saw from Gigabyte, the Atari Pong table, the 3D rudder controller that's coming to, coming to the PS4, and, speakers, audio, just on and on and on. And then, Netflix and the Lost in Space props, and it's just like kaboom, where do you begin? And it's like, just when you mention one thing, you think, oh my God. And it was great because we see a lot of stuff where you see like 210-inch televisions and, concept cars of the future and all of that. We saw the flying cars and the drones, but there was so much more that was just much more tangible. Washing machines, dryers, camera equipment, just new stuff from Nikon, robots. I mean, John Deere had this massive harvester combine thing right there on the floor, and everyone was like so excited to go up and climb up into the cab and get a picture doing this thing. There was the what would you call it, Michael? It was like a mixed reality thing where they had a mix of VR and they were sitting on this platform that would shake and turn them like this and turn them every way. My wife dragged me into this cage where we basically had to do a 360 camera experience on a Samsung tablet and just on and on and on. So this is going to take us a while. The rollaway TVs, we actually have some video that we're putting out, which were amazing. So 8K all over the place. Just got back a few hours ago. We're still trying to process all the stuff we saw, but we'll have a lot more of that this week. So, guys, we covered a ton of stuff, and I think we've got it all. Let's see what next week has for us with all the news. It's going to be interesting to see if people get really quiet tech-wise after CES, or if they're going to go full out, because let's remember, PAX South is just a couple of weeks away. So until then, folks, take care, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great one.